G'day guys, Tim here, the guy in the hat from Beat the Reset, coming to you from Studio 4. Today's episode is to break down what is going on with Venezuela and why it is the United States has an interest in Nikolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela, and why it is he is being accused of the things that they are claiming. Does it have anything to do with terrorism, or is it likely to be something a little more obvious and a little more meaningful to the US? And what I mean by that is there are three parts to this. So let's take it from the top and let's get you understanding what it is that's actually going on. So the three parts to the equation come as no great surprise. One is oil, two is the petrodollar, and three is the BRICS group, or the BRICS, the economic trading group known as BRICS. And we're going to go through each of these and we're going to break it down. Starting with, of course, oil. Oil is one of the most important commodities on the planet. I personally believe it is in great abundance, although as usual we are told that it's about to run out, of course, and this idea of scarcity, of course, keeps the prices high, a little bit like the diamond trade and many other kinds of industries that rely on you believing in the rarity of such things in order to keep the prices high. But the truth is oil really scarce? Well, again, we will never really know the answer to that, but if you have a look at the nations around the world that have the largest oil reserves, now I'm not talking about oil production, I'm talking about oil reserves. Venezuela comes in at number one by orders of magnitude. So isn't that interesting? So first of all, does Venezuela have anything that's of interest to the greater masses or the planet in general, and to the other 195 sovereign nations? And yes, it would be the word oil, a simple three-letter word that has caused more issues than you can care to imagine. So Venezuela has, by orders of magnitude, the most oil on the planet in its reserves, and of course you could safely say that it's around about 2 to 3 times its nearest rival, which would be Saudi Arabia, Russia, even the US, and so on. These are huge oil reserves, but Venezuela is definitely the front runner. The problem for Venezuela, as I've explained in the past, is it's difficult to produce oil in Venezuela because their oil is out at sea and not land-based. So this presents issues for the production of oil in Venezuela. So oil is the first, does Venezuela have an interest in oil? Yes. Does the rest of the world have an interest in Venezuela having an interest in oil? Yes, that's of great concern. And of course, being the president, Nikolas Maduro, he is there to toe the party line. He's not there to do anything that is dramatic. He is just there to make sure that things flow smoothly, much like, of course, Colonel Gaddafi in Libya and Saddam Hussein in Iraq. These guys were there to do a job. You're not there to get creative. Just toe the party line and everything will be just fine. So that's oil taken care of. The next one is the petrodollar. Now, the petrodollar it was a necessity for the United States in 1974 because the world had lost interest in the US dollar after Nixon was forced to leave the Bretton Woods system for a few reasons. One, because it didn't work. Two, because the US could not the French under de Gaulle, of course, had floated warships into the US harbour demanding that gold be handed over under the Bretton Woods system because the US dollar was no longer wanted by the French. And I also think that the other reason the US left the Bretton Woods standard was under pressure from the French, because the US was required to either give up gold under the Bretton Woods Agreement or to tear up a 26-year unilateral agreement, which was signed at Bretton Woods in 1944, where nations were trading US dollars unilaterally. Of course, once that agreement was ripped up on the August the 15th, 1971, there was no requirement for nations to continue. This dealt a big blow to the US. It looked like the US dollar was going to slip into perpetuity and be largely forgotten. But of course, one trade embargo later, which was 1973, of course, Kissinger was sent in to do a deal with Saudi Arabia to basically agree to sell all oil that was not coming out of the US. All oil that was not manufactured or distributed by the US was to be sold in US dollars. That was the agreement, under the guise of protection, whatever that means, military protection, we don't know. But of course, the US was to provide military aid and protection to countries such as Saudi Arabia and protect the Middle East. And of course, we've never seen more wars than we've seen since then in the last 50 years. So, of course, the great danger for the US is that the US dollar gets forgotten in this. And of course, you're dealing with very powerful central banks. You're dealing with the Federal Reserve. You're dealing with the Bank for International Settlements. You're dealing with 63 subsidiary central banks of the Bank for International Settlements, all holding US dollars in reserve for the purposes of trading oil. Keeps the US dollar relevant. It keeps it buoyant. It means that the US is in an interesting situation over its competitors. It gets to print its US dollars at a time when the rest of the world has to work for those dollars. And of course, this system works well, provided that everybody just toes the line. Where the whole system falls apart is when somebody steps out of line. And that is really what we're seeing now with Venezuela. The final element of this, of course, is the BRICS nations. Now, the BRICS nations are essentially an economic trading group. We saw their emergence in around about 2009 with the core nations of Brazil, which is an interesting one because they're based in South America, right near Argentina, and of course not too far from Venezuela. So Brazil, Russia, no surprises there. India, China, and of course South Africa are a very, very big mineral-based nation. So this was the core part of your 2009 BRICS trading group, the group that decided originally that we need to get away from US dollars altogether, a little bit like what happened, as I said, after Nixon tore up the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1971. It was time for the world to move on. So since 2009, BRICS has doubled in size in terms of its membership. So the five core group of nations was Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. The new core that has been formulated since then up until 2025 is Ethiopia, Egypt, United Arab Emirates, Iran, and Indonesia. So all of these are countries that are very, very interested in the de-dollarization strategy. They are very keen to see the end of trading in US dollars and seeing some sort of, segregation between themselves and the weaponized US dollar, because to the rest of the world, to the US dollar, to the United States, the USD is a fabulous economic tool. To the rest of the world, it is nothing more than a weapon. So that is really all it is. It's used for sanctioning. It's used for all sorts of control over nations. You can see that in things like the International Monetary Fund's SDR. That's really what it is. It's this kind of weaponized piece of paper with pictures of dead presidents all over it. So this is really the situation that Venezuela finds itself in. And of course, this was always going to be the way things went. For me, the nations, as I've spoken about in the past, as we transition away from the US dollar and towards a new kind of digital system, the issue was always going to be Saudi Arabia in amongst all of this, because Saudi Arabia, a lot of people don't realize, was to become the 11th member of the BRICS trading group. Argentina became the 11th member very briefly, but Javier Milei was, of course, coerced into stepping down and ceasing and desisting from taking any further part in BRICS. Left the door open for Saudi Arabia. They came in, they briefly looked at the opportunity, but of course, if Saudi Arabia were to join BRICS, the major problem for the United States is Saudi Arabia. Aramco is one of the major drivers of the petrodollar, and without Saudi Arabia on board would make things very complex for the US, especially considering the fact that they are non-warring nations. The US and Saudi Arabia would not want to be at war with each other. because economically that is highly problematic for the US. They're very, very specific about which nations they target. Iran, of course, has been the topic of the US crosshairs with warships in the Persian Gulf, and of course Iran's oil fields being bombed. You know, you're told that this was all about terrorism and so on, but really, was it? I mean, you know, Iran and Russia were both placed into sanction and told they couldn't use the SWIFT rails. So instead of using SWIFT rails, they decided to get really creative and build their own rails independent of SWIFT, which of course meant that they could trade without the US dollar at all, and without SWIFT rails. They seemed to survive perfectly well, which then of course pushed Russia onto the next chapter, which was to of course supply oil to China using digital transactions, some sort of digital currency transaction, excuse me. And this is what has happened. So the United States is in this interesting predicament in their zest and keenness to see the US dollar survive. What they're doing is they're driving nations away from it at an ever increasing pace. So that means that the United States finds itself in this incredibly very, very interesting kind of chess move style situation. Saudi Arabia holding all the cards as far as petrodollar is concerned. 63 central banks underneath the Bank for International Settlements trading 60% of USD in their reserves for the purposes of trading oil. 20% held in reserve for euro, around 15% for British pound and yen, and about 5% for yuan and renminbi. So it means that the USD is still the front runner, but the problem is when you get nations like Venezuela, who are clearly not towing the party line and selling oil to China out the back door for yuan. Now, here is the problem for Venezuela: selling oil to China. China is a BRICS nation. It also holds full veto power on the board of the UN. By the way, there are 5 nations that hold full veto power on the board of the UN, just while we're on it. Russia, China, United States, Great Britain and France. These countries cannot go to war with each other. That is what the veto power basically gives them. So if one tries to invade the other, one of the 5 nations can simply veto and call it, and that is the end of it. So the question in the end is, what will the US do here? How are they going to navigate their way through essentially what looks like the impending, I wouldn't say collapse of the US dollar, but the impending decline? US dollars are essentially, again, still world reserve currency, and that could end very quickly if these kinds of oil trades were to ramp up to any kind of great degree. The only advantage for the US is that Chinese yuan is not really traded terribly much for oil around the world. It's not really a currency that anybody would really hold much in reserve. US dollars are just easier to use and easier to trade. So Venezuela getting wrapped over the knuckles, Nikolas Maduro being taken into custody for whatever purpose we don't know, being told that something to do with terrorism. Same happened to Gaddafi, same happened to Saddam Hussein for very, very similar reasons. So now oil is back on the headlines again as a very rare commodity that is very important, and of course has to be traded in US dollars. That's what this is all about. There is nothing more to this. There is nothing less to this. BRICS will continue to expand. The BRICS nations, Palestine has put in a bid to become part of BRICS, and isn't that an interesting scenario? Palestine has something unusual about it, and that of course is that it is not a signatory to the UN. Isn't that interesting? So the Islamic State of Palestine is not a signatory to the United Nations, together with the canonical arm of the Holy See, which is the Vatican. So it's interesting that you've got one of the non-signatories starting to look at a BRICS alliance, which means de-dollarization in simple terms. So we're expecting that BRICS will increase its membership from its current 10 to around 44. The interesting thing about the number 44 is that was the exact number of nations that were signatories to the original World Reserve Currency Bretton Woods Agreement. It was around 44 allied nations. So it looks like history is repeating itself. What do I see for the US dollar going forward? Well, US dollars are now, of course, working in parallel with something called stablecoin. Stablecoin is kind of the electronic version, if you like, of the US dollar, through corporations such as USDT, USDC, which is Circle, and of course USD1, which is an interest of Donald Trump. These kinds of stablecoins are backed by treasuries, and in the case of USDT, they're also redeemable for gold, but you would have to physically go to Switzerland to redeem the gold, and there's, that's a very, very big task for a lot of people to jump on a plane and go and redeem a token in gold. But my point is that stablecoins are a very serious contender as we transition to something else. Now, I don't see stablecoins as the solution. I just don't see it. I see them as an interim step that could essentially keep the US dollar trading for a little longer. But I see central bank digital currencies as the end game, not stablecoins. So there's still this kind of final step, if you like. So the world is trying to move away from US dollars. The United States knows this. The United States is well aware that they cannot continue with this US dollar for too much longer because, of course, it is in negative velocity. It has been printed by the Federal Reserve since 1913. It has been weaponized. It's used for sanctioning. As I said, it's used to fund the military. It's used as part of one of the baskets of currencies in the SDR. And the big question is, what are the gold reserves like of the United States? If the United States had a liquidity crisis, they're currently at 38 trillion in debt with no intentions of bringing it down, looking to increase to 41 trillion. What is the liquidity like in the US? Well, the question is, have they got any gold? These are the questions that you have to ask yourself. Is there really any gold at Fort Knox? That was the question. That they've never proven it, so they've never been called to task on it. We've only seen a very small amount of gold assayed. So the question is, what is the liquidity really like in the US? Are we really down to just a game of whack-a-mole where nations try to sell oil out the back door to China and Russia and other nations in ruble and yuan? Is the United States just going to send in the military just to try to basically, I guess, war room their way out of this mess? So it is a real problem for the United States, and I have no doubt that in the background under Project Agora, they are working with the administration, the US administration, the Federal Reserve, and the Bank for International Settlements are working on Project Agora to design a CBDC to get them out of this mess eventually when this whole thing flips. BRICS, of course, dealing with mBridge, which is the currency bridge that gets them from their sovereign trading currencies into something that is a little more workable among the group. And that no doubt will have enormous value and interest because the BRICS group are heavy commodities-based nations. So for me, Venezuela, no great surprise, largest oil fields on the planet, supplying oil to China in yuan. That's pretty much what I see this to be all about. Another nation to keep your eye out for going forward is Nigeria. Nigeria is, of course, the biggest oil-producing nation in Africa. So far, they haven't stepped out of line, but of course, they are still on the radar of great interest. So again, the three parts to this Venezuela affair: oil, petrodollar, and BRICS. As I said in a previous podcast, that the petrodollar, if we see the end of the petrodollar, what it means is effectively that would mean that nations are no longer reliant on the US dollar to trade oil, which would probably mean that the US dollar would slip into imperpetuity and become relatively irrelevant. That is a position the US will not entertain. It is not tenable for the United States. So they are going to, as I said, they will control their way through this to maintain that status. Since we're not on a gold standard anymore and there's no requirement for the US to be on a gold standard. In fact, gold is a tier 1 reserve asset of the central banks. but there's no real requirement for them to peg their dollar to gold in any specific way or any meaningful way. The other asset, of course, we've seen major moves in recently is physical silver, and of course the two major producers of silver on the planet are Mexico and China. There's a huge amount of silver, silver runoff in the Yucatan area in the north of South America. In places like Bolivia and so on. But Mexico is the number one producer of silver, silver being generally a product of copper mines and zinc and gold mines. China is the other, and China, of course, has said that's it. We're not supplying silver to the planet anymore. We're not providing any more silver outside of China, whether that's in response to this strong arm tackle by the United States on Venezuela, because Venezuela was supplying oil to China. So, but one thing I can safely say is it's what is not going on is what is being reported in the media. That is almost a certainty, in my opinion. And I think anybody that knows anything about the way this planet functions would know that that's pretty much not what you're seeing in the mainstream media is basically how to placate the masses, how to give the common man the feeling that, this is, you rotters, you need to have a baddie, and looks like Maduro drew the short straw, and he's now the baddie. But really, in reality, it's just an economic decision, which I think is a clever move, but of course, it's going to come undone very, very quickly as the US scrambles to protect its its petrodollar status. Again, which is, in my opinion, the only thing that is holding this entire show up here. So that's all I really wanted to talk to you about. If you like our work, you like our research, remember to follow and subscribe to Beat the Reset here. Share this video, please. Share this as far and wide as you can. You are more than welcome to use it for whatever purposes you need to use it for. There is no copyright on this, and this is for informational and educational purposes only. Happy to hear your thoughts and comments as well. That's it for me, the guy in the hat from Beat the Reset. I am, of course, an author of 3 books. My first book was called Things We Were Never Told About Money. You can get that on Amazon, Things We Were Never Told About Money. My second book was about physical silver and the history of silver. That's called The Great Asset Shift. And my third book is called it's 2033, The Great Reset, talking about the next 10 years or so of trading and what's going to happen with AI and so on, and specifically commodities and digital assets like Bitcoin and central bank digital currencies, where this is going to go, in my opinion. So if you're interested in those books, I may just have some copies here. I'll see if I can grab them for you to show you. Here they are here. For those of you that are interested in my work, my first one is called Things You Never Told About Money. That was printed in the August of 2022. My second book, again available on Amazon, called The Great Asset Shift. Here it is here. My third book just came out, 2033, The Great Reset. These are all available from my website at beatthereset.com.au, and also from Amazon. So that's where these things are available. So you can get all of those. You can buy them all together. You can buy them one at a time. Also, we have a Patreon channel if you'd like to join Beat the Reset on Patreon for some of my deeper work and deeper research, which doesn't come out on the mainstream. Most of it is not available on the mainstream. And also our Instagram channel. Now, we've had a change of Instagram channel for those of you that have been asking. Unfortunately, Instagram, we had 100,000 followers on our Beat the Reset page, but Instagram or some other force took us down. And of course, that is now that is no longer available. But we are on Instagram as btr.bullion. I'll put the link below so you can see. But btr.bullion, please follow us and support us there for our day-to-day knowledge and information on markets, specifically do with gold, silver, and Bitcoin, which are our primary wealth positions. So btr.bullion, of course, is our new company, and we'll be providing a gold and silver to the markets, 999 investor grade gold and silver to the markets from March 2026. So that's our journey. That's it for me, the guy in the hat. Thank you so much for listening today. And as always, look after your health, look after your families, and make good choices.